What happens when the man who threw you away is forced to watch you ascend to a world he can only dream of? For years, Ethan Carter told anyone who would listen that his ex-wife, Olivia, was a career-obsessed workaholic who didn't know the first thing about being a partner. He had his new perfect fiancée, Maddie, the ultimate wife material. He was the winner. But then a single headline shattered his carefully constructed reality. A headline that announced Olivia not just as successful, but as the bride of one of the world's most enigmatic billionaires. This isn't a fairy tale. It's the story of what happens when a man's ego writes checks his reality can't cash. Ethan Carter had a sermon, and he delivered it with the passion of a convert. He preached it at backyard barbecues over craft beers, in hushed tones at upscale restaurants, and in casual asides to his colleagues in the polished corridors of his mid-level finance firm. The gospel was simple. He had finally found true happiness, and its name was Madison Hayes. Maddie, he'd say, a contented smile playing on his lips. She just gets it. She understands what a man needs at the end of a long day. He'd usually be holding Maddie's hand when he said this, her presence serving as Exhibit A in the case for his newfound enlightenment. She was pretty, with a girl-next-door charm, a sprinkle of freckles, and a laugh that was always ready and willing. She worked as a part-time yoga instructor and was training to be a nutritionist. Her ambitions were wholesome, manageable. They didn't threaten to eclipse his own. The unspoken, yet deafeningly loud counterpoint to this sermon was his ex-wife, Olivia Rossi. He rarely used her name. She was simply my ex. The adjectives he attached to her were starkly different: driven, intense, always on, and his personal favorite, just not nurturing. You know, a man wants a partner, not a competitor. He explained to his friend Mark one Saturday as they stood over a grill, the scent of sizzling burgers filling the air. Maddie was inside, laughing with Mark's wife, her silhouette visible through the kitchen window. My ex. She couldn't switch off. We'd be in bed, and she'd be scrolling through market trends on her phone. She'd forget to pick up the dry cleaning because she was closing a deal. The house never felt like a home. It felt like a launch pad for her career. Mark nodded, slowly, flipping a patty. She was always smart, though. Smart isn't everything, Ethan retorted, a little too quickly. What's the point of a brilliant mind if it can't remember your anniversary? Maddie made me a 3-course meal for our 6-month dating anniversary. From scratch. That's wife material. That was his favorite phrase, wife material. Maddie was the embodiment of it. She organized their social calendar, remembered his mother's birthday, and made sure his favorite brand of coffee was always in the cupboard. Her world seemed to revolve around building a comfortable, supportive life for him, for them. She admired his work at the firm, listened intently to his stories about office politics, and soothed his ego when a deal went south. She was the calm harbor to his ex-wife's stormy sea. Their divorce had been finalized 2 years ago, and in Ethan's retelling, it was an amicable, logical conclusion. We just wanted different things, he'd say with a shrug. I wanted a family, a home. She wanted a boardroom. He omitted the screaming matches the nights he'd come home to an empty house, not because Olivia was closing a deal, but because she couldn't bear to be in the same room as him. He forgot the way he'd belittled her ambitions, calling her small startup project a cute little hobby. Someone he had convinced himself, and was working tirelessly to convince everyone else, that the failure of his marriage was entirely on Olivia. It was a failure of her femininity, her priorities, her very nature. His engagement to Maddie was his vindication. The 1-carat cushion-cut diamond on her finger was a trophy. Their life together was a portrait of domestic bliss curated for public consumption. Ethan's Instagram was a gallery of their happiness. Maddie laughing as she kneaded dough in their pristine kitchen, the two of them clinking wine glasses on their balcony overlooking the city. A selfie snuggled on the couch with the caption, "Nothing better than a quiet night in with my fiancée. Wife material, blessed." His friends mostly bought into it. They saw how relaxed Ethan seemed, how much he smiled. They saw Maddie's adoration for him. If they had private reservations, if they remembered the vibrant, witty Olivia and felt a pang of something missing, they kept it to themselves. It was easier to celebrate the new improved Ethan than to question the narrative he was so carefully crafting. One evening, about 6 months into their engagement, Ethan and Maddie were hosting a small dinner party. His boss, Mr. Henderson, and his wife were the guests of honor. Maddie, a gracious host, had prepared an elaborate meal of roast chicken and Dauphinoise potatoes. "Ethan, you are a lucky man," Mr. Henderson said, raising his glass of Pinot Noir. "Madison, this meal is divine. My wife hasn't cooked a meal like this in 20 years. Maddie blushed prettily. "I love taking care of my man." Ethan beamed, placing a proprietary hand on her shoulder. "She's one of a kind. Traditional values. You know how rare that is these days." "Henderson," he shot a meaningful look at his boss. "Some women are so focused on shattering glass ceilings, they forget how to build a foundation at home." It was a direct, albeit anonymous shot at Olivia. He knew Henderson had met Olivia a few times at old company functions and had been impressed by her sharpness. This was Ethan's way of course-correcting that impression, of solidifying his new brand. Later that night, as they cleaned up, Maddie turned to him, her expression earnest. "Did you really mean that? About traditional values?" "Of course I did," he said, kissing her forehead. "You're everything I've ever wanted. You make me happy, Maddie. My ex. She made me tired." Maddie leaned into him, satisfied with the answer. She didn't question the comparison. She accepted it as a compliment, a testament to her own worth in his eyes. She was the woman who had healed him, the one who had succeeded, where the brilliant Olivia Rossi had failed. She had no reason to believe otherwise. Ethan's world was perfectly ordered, his past neatly filed away as a cautionary tale, and his future with his perfect wife material, fiancée, stretching out before him like a calm, sunlit road. He was the protagonist of his own story, the wise man who had made the right choice. And for a little while longer, he was allowed to believe it. The illusion of Ethan's victory, so meticulously constructed, was incinerated on a Tuesday morning by the cold blue light of 1,000 screens. It didn't happen in a vacuum. For weeks, a certain name had been bubbling up in the financial news circuits Ethan monitored. Obsessively, Damien Thorne. Thorne was a spectre in the world of high finance and tech, a man who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire from the ground up before he was 35. He was notoriously private. There were maybe 3 or 4 authenticated photos of him in existence, all of them grainy and years old. He gave no interviews, attended no galas, and his company, Ethelred Industries, operated with a level of secrecy that was the stuff of legend. Thorne wasn't just rich, he was a myth. Ethan and his colleagues spoke of Damien Thorne in the same way ancient mariners might have spoken of a kraken, with a mixture of awe, terror, and disbelief. He was a market mover, a kingmaker. A single rumored investment from him could send a stock soaring. On that particular Tuesday, Ethan was in a mid-morning meeting presenting quarterly projections with his usual slick confidence. His phone, which he'd placed face down on the polished mahogany table, began to vibrate. Not a single buzz, but a frantic, insistent series of them. Mark, sitting beside him, shot him a questioning look. Ethan subtly shook his head, trying to maintain focus on his PowerPoint slide. But the buzzing didn't stop. It was a cascade of notifications and digital avalanche. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. He was in the middle of a sentence about market penetration when his boss, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat. "Ethan, is everything all right?" Henderson asked, his eyes gesturing towards the vibrating phone. "Sounds like you're a popular man this morning." A few colleagues chuckled. Flustered, Ethan mumbled an apology and silenced the device. But the seed of unease had been planted. His presentation faltered, his smooth delivery becoming slightly stilted. He rushed through the last few slides, his mind now preoccupied with the silent, insistent phone in his pocket. When the meeting finally adjourned, Ethan snatched the phone. The lock screen was a chaotic mosaic of notifications. Texts from Mark, his college buddies, his sister. A dozen alerts from news apps. He swiped it open, his thumb hovering over the messages. The first one he saw was from Mark, a simple explosive link to a Forbes article. Above the link, Mark had typed a single sentence. Ethan, you are not going to believe this. He clicked the link. The page loaded, and for a moment the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The headline was stark black and brutal. It read, "A power union, reclusive billionaire, Damien Thorne, to marry tech CEO, Olivia Rossi." Ethan's breath hitched. It couldn't be. His Olivia. No, there must be another Olivia Rossi, who was a tech CEO. It was a common enough name. He scrolled down his heart, pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. And then he saw the picture. It was a professional photograph, stunning in its intimacy and power. Damien Thorne, no longer a grainy myth, but a startlingly handsome man with sharp, intelligent eyes and a jawline that could cut glass, stood with his arm around a woman. But it was the woman who stole Ethan's breath. It was Olivia. But it was an Olivia he had never seen before. The woman in the photo was radiant, her dark hair styled in sleek waves, her smile not the tired, strained one he remembered, but wide and genuine. She was wearing a simple but exquisitely tailored emerald green dress that highlighted the fire in her eyes. She wasn't just standing next to Damien Thorne. She was his equal, her posture exuding a confidence that bordered on regal. She looked powerful. She looked happy. She looked utterly devastatingly untouchable. His Olivia. CEO Olivia Rossi. The article was a paean to their success. It detailed Thorne's legendary status and then introduced Olivia as the undisputed visionary behind Innovate Forward, a startup that had in just 2 years become a leader in sustainable AI. It spoke of her genius, her unrelenting drive, and her recent multi-billion-dollar valuation after securing a revolutionary patent. The company he had called a cute little hobby was now being hailed as a world-changing enterprise. The article mentioned her background, her summa cum laude degree from Stanford, her early work at a top consulting firm. It even included a brief cutting sentence. Rossi, who is divorced, founded Innovate Forward shortly after the dissolution of her first marriage, channeling her formidable energy into her professional ambitions. The words hit him like a physical blow. Channeling her formidable energy. They made it sound like their divorce had been the catalyst for her greatness, the removal of an obstacle, the removal of him. He sank into his office chair, the world around him, muffled as if he were underwater. The fluorescent lights of the office seemed too bright, the air too thin. He clicked on another link, this one to Vogue. The headline was even worse, the wedding of the decade inside Damien Thorne and Olivia Rossi's ultra-private engagement. More photos. Olivia laughing on a yacht, her hand in Thorne's. A close-up of the ring, a colossal flawless sapphire that made Maddie's diamond look like a speck of dust. His phone buzzed again. It was a text from his mother. "Ethan, did you see the news about Olivia Goodness? I suppose all that time she spent on her computer paid off." Even his mother's words, meant to be a form of awkward consolation, felt like a jab. He thought of all the things he had said. "She's not nurturing. She doesn't know how to build a home. I need a partner, not a competitor." He had painted her as a failure in the one arena he deemed important, being a wife. And now the world was celebrating her, not just for her career, but for landing the most elusive, powerful bachelor on the planet. She hadn't just failed to be his wife. She had leveled up to become a billionaire's bride. His carefully constructed narrative, the gospel he had preached so fervently, had been torn to shreds and set on fire. He wasn't the winner who had wisely traded up. He was the fool who had let a diamond slip through his fingers because he was too blind to see its worth. He was the man who had complained about the rain only to find out the woman he'd left behind had learned to command the storm. The man who championed wife material had just discovered his ex-wife was made of stardust and steel. The door to his office opened, and Mark poked his head in his face, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. "Buddy, you okay?" Ethan looked up, his face pale, the Forbes article still burning on his screen. He couldn't form words. All he could do was stare at the picture of Olivia, the woman he thought he knew, the woman he had so confidently dismissed, now smiling at the world from an unattainable height. The news of Olivia's engagement didn't just break Ethan's ego, it haunted him. Olivia Rossi became a ghost in his machine, a phantom presence that permeated every corner of his life, turning his domestic bliss with Maddie into a stage play where he was forgetting his lines. His obsession started subtly. It began with a late-night Google search, then another. Soon he had set up alerts for her name for Damien Thorns, for Innovate Forward. His phone, once a tool for work and a gallery of his life with Maddie, became a shrine to his ex-wife's success. He consumed every article, every blog post, every paparazzi photo he could find. He saw Olivia and Damien leaving a Michelin-starred restaurant in Paris. He saw them at a tech conference in Kyoto, where Olivia was the keynote speaker. He saw a candid shot of them on a windswept Scottish moor, reportedly near the castle Thorne had recently purchased. In every image, Olivia glowed. The fatigue that had perpetually lived under her eyes during their marriage was gone, replaced by a vibrant, focused energy. She wasn't just beautiful, she was formidable. Ethan started to draw comparisons, a slow, toxic poison seeping into his relationship with Maddie. One evening, Maddie was excitedly telling him about a new vegetarian lasagna recipe she had perfected. "It's amazing, Ethan. I used a cashew-based cheese, and you can't even tell the difference. It's so much healthier," she said, her eyes bright with pride. A year ago, he would have praised her, called her a culinary genius, and posted a picture of it with the hashtag #HadWifeMaterial. Now, his mind superimposed a different image over the scene. He remembered an article he'd read that morning. Olivia Rossi, CEO of Innovate Forward, addresses the World Economic Forum on the future of sustainable food production. "That's great, Mads," he said, his voice flat. He pushed the lasagna around his plate. "Really great." Maddie's smile faltered. "You don't like it?" "No, it's delicious, just got a lot on my mind from work." It was a lie, and they both knew it. He wasn't thinking about work. He was thinking about Olivia addressing world leaders while he was eating vegan lasagna. The thought was so absurd, so galling, it soured the taste of the food in his mouth. The ghost of Olivia was present in their conversations too. He would find himself replaying arguments from their marriage, but with a horrifying new clarity. He began to remember the things he had chosen to forget. Flashback. 3 years ago, their old apartment. Olivia is sitting at their small dining table, which is covered in schematics and financial projections. She hasn't slept in 2 days. Her eyes are red-rimmed, but blazing with excitement. "Ethan, look at this," she says, her voice thrumming with energy. "I've streamlined the energy conversion process. The efficiency gain is almost 12 This is it. This is the breakthrough." Ethan glances over from the TV where he's watching a football game. He sees a mess of papers, not a breakthrough. "That's nice, honey. Hey, did you remember to call the plumber about the leaky faucet I reminded you this morning?" Her face falls. The fire in her eyes dims to a hurt flicker. No, I'm sorry, I forgot. I was so caught up in this." "But Ethan, this is huge. This could get us our first round of seed funding." He scoffs, turning back to the game. "Liv, it's a hobby, a cute little project. How many of these breakthroughs have you had? Let's be realistic. Real people have to deal with real-life things, like leaky faucets." The memory was so vivid, it made him flinch. He hadn't just been dismissive. He had been cruel. He had taken her passion and belittled it into a childish pastime. Her cute little project was now valued at over $5 billion. He had complained about a leaky faucet while she was trying to build an ark. Maddie began to notice the change. He was distant, irritable. The adoring gaze he once fixed on her now seemed to look straight through her. He stopped posting about her on social media. The wife material, compliments, dried up completely. One Saturday morning, she found him staring at his laptop, his face a mask of grim fascination. She crept up behind him and saw what he was looking at, a lengthy profile of Olivia in Wired magazine. It was filled with quotes from her colleagues praising her leadership and vision. "Are you okay, Ethan?" Maddie asked softly. He slammed the laptop shut as if he'd been caught looking at pornography. "Yeah, fine. Just keeping up with the competition." "She's not your competition, Ethan," Maddie said, her voice laced with a growing insecurity. "She's your ex-wife, and she's marrying Damien Thorne." He snapped the words, erupting with a venom that shocked them both. "Do you have any idea what that means? It's not just that she's successful, it's that the entire world now sees me as the idiot who let her go." "Nobody thinks that," Maddie said, though her voice wavered. Was she trying to convince him or herself? "Oh, they do," he said, his voice dropping to a bitter whisper. "They look at me, and they think, that's the guy who wasn't good enough for Olivia Rossi. And then they look at you and they think—" He trailed off, but the implication hung heavy and ugly in the air between them. "And they think you're the consolation prize." He didn't say it, but Maddie heard it. She saw it in his eyes. Every time he looked at her now, he was comparing her to the ghost of Olivia. Her wholesome, supportive ambitions now seemed small and insignificant in the shadow of Olivia's global success. Her knowledge of nutrition seemed trivial compared to Olivia's knowledge of quantum computing. The very qualities he had praised as wife material were now in his mind evidence of her inferiority. The haunting became a full-blown obsession. Ethan started driving by the old brownstone he and Olivia had once shared, a place they'd sold during the divorce. He would park across the street and just stare at it, lost in a fog of regret. He started trying to piece together the timeline. She had founded Innovate Forward just 3 months after their divorce was finalized. She must have been planning it, working on it during their final year together, the same year he was complaining that she wasn't paying enough attention to him. He had thought her distraction was a sign of her failing as a wife. He now understood it was the sign of her preparing for a new life, a life that didn't include him. He hadn't just lost her, he had been systematically and surgically removed from her path to greatness. The realization was a slow, agonizing burn, cauterizing his pride and leaving behind a permanent scar. He was no longer the protagonist of his own story. He was a footnote in hers. The digital ghosts were not enough. Ethan's obsession demanded a confrontation in the flesh. He needed to see her, to speak to her, to somehow recalibrate the reality that had spun so violently out of his control. He couldn't just be the man who read about Olivia Rossi in Forbes. He had to force her to acknowledge him, to see him, to give him something. He wasn't even sure what. An explanation. An apology. Validation. He knew that a direct approach was impossible. Calling her would be pathetic. Her number was likely changed anyway. Emailing her would be a digital cry into the void, easily deleted by some high-powered assistant. No, it had to be a chance encounter, something that would allow him to maintain a sliver of dignity. His opportunity came in the form of a high-profile charity gala for the city's children's hospital. He scoured the event's sponsor list online and saw it there in elegant corporate font, Ethelred Industries. Damien Thorne's company was a platinum sponsor. It was almost certain they would be there. Getting tickets was a feat in itself. The gala was one of the most exclusive events of the year. Ethan had to call in a significant favor with his boss, Mr. Henderson, framing it as a crucial networking opportunity. Henderson, likely sensing the desperation, but intrigued by the potential drama, secured 2 tickets. He told Maddie it was a mandatory work event. She was thrilled. She spent a week searching for the perfect dress, finally settling on a soft rose gold sequined gown. She looked beautiful, a shimmering, hopeful figure next to him in the taxi on the way to the museum where the gala was being held. Ethan, however, felt a cold knot of dread and anticipation in his stomach. He was wearing his best tuxedo, but he felt like a fraud, an imposter about to infiltrate a world where he no longer belonged. The museum's grand hall was breathtaking, transformed into a celestial wonderland of twinkling lights and cascading white florals. The city's elite mingled their diamonds and laughter echoing off the marble floors. Ethan scanned the room, his eyes darting over clusters of politicians, socialites, and business tycoons. And then he saw them. They were standing near the grand staircase, a magnetic center of gravity in the glittering crowd. Damien Thorne was exactly as he appeared in photographs, tall, impeccably dressed, in a custom-tailored suit, exuding an aura of quiet, unshakable power. But again, it was Olivia who commanded Ethan's attention. She was wearing a gown of deep sapphire blue, a clear nod to her engagement ring. The dress was a marvel of minimalist architecture, sleek and severe, yet incredibly feminine. It clung to her form, its sharp lines accentuating the confident way she held herself. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, showcasing a pair of diamond earrings that glittered like captive stars. She wasn't just in her element, she was the element. People orbited her, listening with rapt attention as she spoke, her gestures animated and precise. Maddie saw them too. Wow! She breathed, her grip tightening on Ethan's arm. That's her. She's stunning. There was no jealousy in her voice, only pure, unadulterated awe. It made Ethan feel even worse. He steered them towards the bar, his throat suddenly dry. He needed a drink. He needed a plan. He watched her for 20 minutes, a predator stalking his prey. He saw her part from Thorne's side to speak with an elderly woman in a wheelchair, her expression softening with genuine warmth. He saw her laugh at something a city councilman said, a full-throated, joyful sound that he couldn't remember ever hearing from her. This was his moment. She was alone. "I'll be right back," he muttered to Maddie, leaving her by a marble pillar. He walked towards Olivia, his heart hammering against his ribs. Each step felt like wading through wet cement. She had her back to him, finishing her conversation. As the woman in the wheelchair was wheeled away, Ethan stepped forward. "Olivia," she turned. Her eyes, those fiery, intelligent eyes, landed on him. For a fraction of a second, there was a flicker of surprise, a ghost of the woman he once knew. Then it was gone, replaced by a cool, polite neutrality. It was the look one gives a stranger who has mistaken you for someone else. "Ethan," she said. Her voice was calm even. There was no anger, no pain, no shock. There was nothing, and the nothingness was the most painful response of all. "Fancy seeing you here." He managed the words, sounding lame and rehearsed even to his own ears. "It's a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital," she replied, a slight arch in her eyebrow. "I sit on the board. It's not really up to Fancy." The implication was clear. "I belong here. What are you doing here?" "Right, of course. That's great," he stammered. "You look, well, the news, I mean. Congratulations. It's incredible." "Thank you," she said. She didn't elaborate. She didn't ask how he was. She simply stood there, a portrait of patience, waiting for him to finish whatever this was, so she could move on. He floundered, searching for the right words. "I guess I was surprised. A tech CEO. Who knew?" He tried for a light, teasing tone, the kind they used to share. It fell completely flat. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. "I knew," she said simply. The simplicity of the statement was a blade to his gut. It recontextualized their entire past. He thought he was the one in control, the one setting the terms of their life. He now saw he was merely a bystander to a story she had been writing for herself all along. All those nights you were on your laptop. He began, a note of accusation creeping into his voice. You were building all this. You never told me. A flicker of something, not anger, but perhaps pity, crossed her face. You told me it was a cute little hobby, Ethan. You said real people have to worry about leaky faucets. I learned to stop sharing my dreams with people who would only belittle them. Her words were not a shout, but a quiet, clinical dissection of his failure. He had no response. She was right. From across the room, Damien Thorne had noticed their interaction. He began to walk towards them, not with aggression, but with a calm, purposeful stride. He was a shark gliding through water, effortless and dominant. Everything all right, darling? Thorne asked, his voice a low baritone. He slid his arm around Olivia's waist, his eyes locking onto Ethan's. It was not a threatening gaze, but an assessing one. He was sizing Ethan up, and in a single glance, dismissing him as irrelevant. Perfectly fine, Olivia said, leaning into Thorne's embrace. She turned her smile to him, a smile of genuine affection and partnership. Ethan was just offering his congratulations. That's civil of you, Thorne said to Ethan, his tone making it clear he thought it was anything but. Ethan felt himself shrink under Thorne's gaze. He was outmatched in every conceivable way, wealth, power, status, and most devastatingly in his role in Olivia's life. He was the past, a footnote. Damien Thorne was the present and the future. Just then, Maddie appeared at his side, looking nervous and out of place. Ethan, is everything okay? She asked. Olivia's eyes moved to Maddie. Her expression softened for a moment. She gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of female solidarity that completely excluded Ethan. In that moment, he realized Olivia didn't hate him. He didn't register enough to be hated. He was an obstacle she had overcome, a lesson she had learned. We should go, Olivia said to Thorne, completely turning her back on Ethan. Dr. Evans wanted to discuss the new pediatric wing. As they walked away, Thorne's hand resting protectively on the small of her back, Ethan was left standing in their wake, the scent of Olivia's expensive perfume lingering in the air. He felt Maddie's hand on his arm, a grounding but unwelcome touch. He had engineered the collision, hoping to cause a dent, a spark, something to prove he still had an effect on her. Instead, he was the one left wrecked on the side of the road, watching her drive off into the stratosphere without a glance in the rearview mirror. The disastrous encounter at the gala sent Ethan into a downward spiral. The cool dismissal from Olivia and the silent, authoritative presence of Damien Thorne played on a loop in his mind. He became sullen, withdrawn, and openly resentful. His relationship with Maddie, already fractured by his obsession, began to crumble under the weight of his misery. She tried to be supportive, but her attempts to comfort him were met with irritation. Her wife-material qualities, her patience, her gentle nature now grated on his nerves, serving only as a reminder of everything Olivia was not. The real twist, the final nail in the coffin of Ethan's self-delusion, didn't come from a headline or a public humiliation. It came from the past, in the form of an old friend and a drunken, pathetic confession. Her name was Clara, a mutual friend from the early days of Ethan and Olivia's marriage. She had been Olivia's confidant and had always maintained a friendly, if more distant relationship with Ethan after the divorce. Maddie, in a desperate attempt to understand the man she was supposed to marry, had reached out to Clara for coffee. She wanted to know what Olivia was really like, hoping to find a flaw, a crack in the perfect facade that would make her feel less like a second-place trophy. They met in a quiet cafe, and Maddie, her voice trembling slightly, explained the situation. He's obsessed with her, Clara. Since the news about her engagement, he's a different person. He looks at me like I'm not enough. I just need to understand what their marriage was like. Why did they really break up? Clara sighed, stirring her latte. She had seen Ethan's narrative play out on social media and through the grapevine. She had stayed silent out of loyalty to Olivia, but seeing Maddie's genuine pain changed her mind. Olivia had moved on to an unassailable, new life. Perhaps it was time the truth of the old one was told. Ethan has his version of the story, Clara began carefully. The one where Olivia was too ambitious and not domestic enough. That's not a lie exactly. It's just not the truth. She leaned forward, her voice low. About a year before they separated, Olivia wasn't just working on her hobby. She had a real shot. She had a meeting lined up with a venture capital firm, a big one. They were seriously interested in her initial proposal for what would eventually become Innovate Forward. She was terrified and ecstatic. It was all she could talk about for weeks. Maddie listened, her heart sinking. The meeting was on a Friday, Clara continued, her eyes fixed on Maddie's. The Thursday night before she and Ethan had a massive fight. He accused her of abandoning their life together, of caring more about nerdy spreadsheets than about him. He told her she was going to fail, that she was delusional for thinking she could compete in that world. It was brutal. The next morning, Olivia went to the meeting, and she bombed. She was rattled, her confidence was shot. The feedback was that her financial projections, the very core of her pitch, were a mess. They were filled with small but critical errors. The VC firm passed, telling her the project lacked financial viability. She was devastated. She thought she had choked under pressure. Clara took a deep breath before delivering the final blow. A few weeks later, Olivia was clearing off their shared computer, and she found the original presentation file in the trash bin. She looked at the file's history. It showed that the night of their big fight, after she had gone to bed, someone had logged in at 2 a.m. and spent 30 minutes in the document, that someone had systematically altered key figures in her financial model. Tiny changes, almost impossible to spot unless you knew what you were looking for, but enough to make the whole projection fall apart under scrutiny. Maddie felt the blood drain from her face. "No," she whispered. "There were only two people who had the password to that computer," Clara said softly. "Olivia and Ethan." The truth was a horrific, ugly thing. Ethan hadn't just been an insecure, unsupportive husband who belittled his wife's dreams. He had been a saboteur, fearing her potential success, fearing she would outgrow him. He had actively, maliciously, and secretly crippled her chances. He hadn't just failed to encourage her, he had tried to ensure she would fail. The divorce hadn't been about wanting different things. It was because Olivia had discovered his ultimate betrayal. She never confronted him with the proof she was too broken and too proud. She simply packed her bags and left, deciding that a clean break was better than a war. She would rebuild on her own, far away from the man who had tried to tear her down. That night, Maddie went home in a state of shock. The apartment she had so lovingly decorated felt cold and alien. Ethan was on the couch drinking scotch and morosely scrolling through his phone, no doubt looking for more news about Olivia. The sight of him stewing in his self-pity over the success he had tried to prevent was repulsive. The final vestiges of her love and sympathy for him evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear disgust. She didn't confront him immediately. She waited. Her moment came 2 nights later. Ethan came home late, stumbling and drunk from after-work drinks with colleagues. He was in a maudlin, self-pitying mood, ranting about how unfair the world was. "She has everything," he slurred, slumping into a chair. "Everything. And what do I have?" This was it. Maddie stood before him, her arms crossed, her face a mask of stone. "You want to know why she has everything, Ethan?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "It's luck," he muttered. "She met a rich guy." "No," Maddie said, her voice rising with a furious power she didn't know she possessed. "It's because she got away from you. Clara told me, Ethan. She told me about the presentation, about the VC meeting, about what you did to her financial projections at 2 in the morning. Ethan's drunken haze seemed to vanish. He stared at her, his face ashen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He was caught, utterly and completely caught. I, he started, but no excuse would come. You didn't think she was wife material because you were terrified she was made of something more. Maddie continued her words like shards of glass. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a cheerleader who would stay on the sidelines. The moment she had a chance to get in the game, a game you knew you couldn't play, you didn't just bench her. You tried to break her legs. She held up her left hand and with a final decisive tug, pulled the 1.5-carat cushion-cut diamond ring from her finger. The ring he had called a trophy. It felt cheap and tainted. She threw it on the coffee table where it landed with a dull, unsatisfying clink. All this time, she said, her voice breaking, with the agony of her own foolishness. I thought I was the woman who was good enough for you. I finally realized the truth. I was just the woman you thought you could control. Your consolation prize. But you lost Ethan. You didn't just lose her, you've lost me too. He didn't protest. He didn't argue. He just sat there, a collapsed ruin of a man stripped of his lies and his last remaining relationship. The ghost of his past betrayal had finally come home, not just to haunt him, but to leave him utterly and completely alone. Maddie's departure was swift and silent. She didn't scream or throw things. The next morning, while Ethan was nursing his hangover, and the even more painful hangover of his exposed soul, she packed her bags. She took the clothes, the yoga mats, the nutrition textbooks. She left behind the life they had built, which she now saw was nothing more than a set piece for his fragile ego. She left the ring on the table. Ethan's world, already tilted, capsized completely. The silence in the apartment was a living entity. It was the silence of two failed relationships, the silence of his own profound moral bankruptcy. He would walk past Maddie's empty closet and feel a pang, not of love, but of loss for the comforting illusion she provided. She had been his shield, his proof that he was a desirable man who had made a good choice. Without her, he was just the guy who sabotaged his brilliant wife and then got dumped by his fiancée. His work suffered. The slick confidence that was his primary professional asset evaporated. His colleagues, who had all seen the news about Olivia and had undoubtedly heard the whispers of his breakup with Maddie, treated him with a mixture of pity and contempt. Mr. Henderson called him into his office one afternoon. "Carter," he said without any preamble, "your numbers are down. You look like hell. Whatever is going on in your personal life, get it sorted. This firm doesn't pay for baggage." The humiliation was absolute. He was failing everywhere. He was the common denominator in his own life's wreckage. He made one last desperate attempt to salvage something. He composed a long, rambling email to Olivia. It was a pathetic cocktail of apology, self-pity, and twisted justification. He admitted to the sabotage, but framed it as a moment of weakness, a desperate act by a man terrified of being left behind. He wrote about how he had never stopped loving her, how he realized now she was the only one for him. He ended it by begging for a chance to talk, to explain himself in person. He hit send in the dead of night, fueled by scotch and desperation. The reply came less than an hour later. It was not from Olivia. It was from an email address he didn't recognize with the subject line, "A final communication." The message was brief and utterly devastating. "Mr. Carter, this email is to confirm that Ms. Rossi has received your message. It is also to inform you that a legal team has been retained to handle any and all future correspondence from you. Any further attempts to contact Ms. Rossi, Mr. Thorne, or their associates, either directly or indirectly, will be met with immediate legal action, including but not limited to a restraining order. Your email has been logged as evidence of harassment. We trust this is the final communication required on this matter. Sincerely, the Office of Damien Thorne." It wasn't even a lawyer's name. It was an anonymous edict from the machine that now protected Olivia. He hadn't just been dismissed. He had been classified as a threat, a nuisance to be managed by underlings. The woman he had once shared a bed with was now so far removed from him that he couldn't even reach her with an apology. He was a piece of spam caught in the filter of her new magnificent life. A few weeks later, the final act of his humiliation played out on every screen in the world. Vogue released the exclusive photos of the wedding. It wasn't a lavish, ostentatious affair, as he might have imagined. It was an event of breathtaking taste and quiet power. The ceremony took place at the Scottish castle he had read about under a canopy of ancient trees. There were only 50 guests. The photos showed Olivia in a wedding dress that defied convention. It was elegant, structured, and modern, with clean lines and a powerful silhouette. She looked less like a princess and more like a queen. But it was the expression on her face that truly broke him. In every photo, she radiated a joy so profound and serene, it seemed to light up the ancient landscape. It was the look of a woman who was not just loved, but seen valued and revered for exactly who she was. The photo that went viral was a candid shot of her and Damien Thorne during the reception. They weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at each other, laughing, a shared joke or a moment of understanding passing between them. They were a team, partners, competitors on the same side, conquering the world together. Ethan stared at the picture on his phone, sitting alone in the sterile apartment that Maddie had left. He saw everything he had thrown away and everything he had tried to destroy. He had wanted a wife who would make his house a home. Olivia had left and built an empire. He had wanted a woman who would live in his shadow. She had found a man who wasn't afraid of her light, a man who wanted to stand in it with her. He finally understood. Olivia's success wasn't a lucky break or a fairy tale. It was the direct result of her talent, her drive, and most painfully, her liberation from him. He had been the anchor weighing her down. In cutting him loose, she had been free to rise. The wreckage of his life was not an accident. It was a consequence. He was not the victim of circumstance. He was the architect of his own desolation. The wedding photos were not an invitation to his ex-wife's new life. They were the closing credits on his own. A year passed, a year of crushing anonymity for Ethan Carter. He kept his job at the firm, but he was a ghost in the hallways. The swagger was gone, replaced by the quiet, shuffling demeanor of a man perpetually braced for bad news. He was no longer invited to the important meetings or the after-work drinks. He was simply there, a piece of furniture. He sold the apartment he had shared with Maddie at a loss and moved into a smaller, nondescript unit in a less fashionable part of town. His life had contracted, shrinking to the size of his own diminished self-worth. He rarely looked up Olivia anymore. It was too painful. Her star had only continued to ascend. Innovate forward. With the backing of Thorne's Ethelred Industries, had become a global behemoth. Olivia Rossi was a household name, a regular on most powerful women lists, a symbol of modern female achievement. She and Thorne were the ultimate power couple, their philanthropy as legendary as their business acumen. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Ethan was sitting in a generic coffee shop, nursing a lukewarm coffee and staring out at the rain-streaked street. It was the kind of aimless, empty day that had become the standard for him. The bell above the door chimed, and two women walked in, shaking rain from their umbrellas. One of them was Maddie. He hadn't seen her since the day she left. She looked different. Her hair was cut shorter, in a chic, no-nonsense bob. She wore stylish glasses and carried a leather satchel. The soft, deferential girl he had tried to mold into his perfect wife was gone. In her place was a confident-looking woman. Their eyes met across the small cafe, a flicker of recognition, then surprise. He expected her to turn and leave, or at least to look away with disdain. She didn't. After a moment's hesitation, she walked over to his table. Her friend found a seat near the window. "Ethan," she said. Her voice was steady, devoid of the anger or pain that had defined their last conversation. "Maddie," he responded, his own voice raspy. You look great. I am great, she said, and it was a simple statement of fact. I went back to school, full-time. I'm finishing my master's in public health policy. I want to work with non-profits, help design community wellness programs. Wow, he said, genuinely surprised. That's impressive. It's what I always wanted to do, she explained. Before I met you, I just sort of, put it on hold. I thought I wanted something else. She looked at him, not with pity, but with a kind of clinical curiosity. I heard you moved. Yeah, he said, gesturing vaguely at his drab surroundings. Downsized. An awkward silence fell between them. It was the silence of a shared history that neither of them was proud of. For what it's worth, Maddie said, finally breaking the silence. I hope you're okay. I'm getting by, he lied. She gave him a small, sad smile. You know, for a long time I was so angry. At you, but also at myself for believing your whole wife material nonsense. I made myself smaller to fit into the box you wanted for me. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But then I realized something. Olivia wasn't the only one who got away from you. I did too. And in a way, you did me a favor. You showed me exactly what I don't want. I don't want to be wife material. I want to be me. Her words weren't meant to be cruel, but they were the most profound indictment of his life he had ever heard. He had been so focused on his loss of Olivia, this larger-than-life figure, that he had barely registered the true nature of his loss of Maddie. He hadn't just lost a fiancée, he had lost a good person, whom he had actively tried to diminish. I have to go, she said, nodding towards her friend. Take care of yourself, Ethan. He watched her walk away, rejoining her friend with an easy laugh. She picked up her satchel, adjusted her glasses, and walked out of the cafe, back into her new, self-defined life. Ethan was left alone at his table, the coffee cold, the rain still falling outside. He finally understood the full scope of his tragedy. His story wasn't about an ex-wife who became a billionaire's bride. It was about a man who was so afraid of the light in others that he chose to live in the dark. He had been offered 2 chances at love, 2 different but equally valuable women, and he had squandered them both through his own insecurity. He didn't have a wife, a fiancée, or even a narrative anymore. All he had was the quiet, persistent, and undeniable knowledge that he was the architect of his own empty room. And for the first time, he didn't blame Olivia or Maddie or Damien Thorne. He had no one to blame but the man staring back at him in the faint reflection of the rain-soaked window. So what's the real takeaway from Ethan's story? It's a harsh reminder that when you try to define someone else's worth, you often just reveal your own limitations. Ethan thought he wanted wife material, but what he really wanted was a mirror that only reflected the version of himself he liked. He tried to dim Olivia's light, only to be blinded by her eventual brilliance. He underestimated Maddie, only to watch her walk away and build a life of purpose he could only envy. He lost not 1, but 2 incredible women, not to fate or bad luck, but to his own suffocating ego. If this story resonated with you,
What happens when a man's final cruel prophecy is shattered in the most spectacular way imaginable? For Emma Vance, the final words her celebrity ex-husband, Julian Thorne, ever spoke to her were a curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. You will die alone. He said it with the smug certainty of a man who believed he had authored her entire existence. But what Julian didn't count on, what the world couldn't have predicted, was that the universe had a flair for irony. Less than 12 hours later, Emma Vance wouldn't just be fine. She'd be on the front page of every major news outlet, her name a global trending topic, all because of a single candid photograph, her hand held gently, securely in the hand of the world's most enigmatic and untouchable billionaire. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about what happens the morning after your world ends. The air in the penthouse was cold, It wasn't the fault of the climate control, a state-of-the-art system Julian Thorne had often boasted about in interviews for architectural magazines. It was a frigid, soul-deep cold that emanated from the man himself. Julian, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile engineered for talk show sofas, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking down at the sparkling expanse of New York City as if he owned it. In many ways, he thought he did. "It's all signed Emma," he said, not turning to look at her. His voice, the same one that calmed millions of his followers with platitudes about unlocking your inner power, was now clipped and sharp, a shard of glass. Emma Vance clutched the pen in her hand, her knuckles white. The final divorce paper sat on the vast marble island in the kitchen, a kitchen she had designed from the veining in the stone to the specific shade of brushed brass on the handles. It was a space meant for warmth, for laughter, for the life she thought they were building. Now, it was just a stage for her public execution. "I know, Julian," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't slept in days. For 10 years, she had been Mrs. Thorne, the quiet, supportive wife of the self-help magnate Julian Thorne, author of the global bestseller The Architect of You. She had been the one who edited his manuscripts until 3 in the morning, who fact-checked his research, who coached him through his anxieties before every major speech. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career as an academic, specializing in Renaissance art, to build his empire, believing his success was their success. The cracks had started as hairline fractures. His casual dismissal of her opinions, his gaslighting her memories of events, the way he'd subtly mock her in front of their influential friends. Then came the affairs which he'd explained away as the unfortunate but necessary burdens of a man of his stature. The final break came when she discovered he wasn't just having an affair. He had a long-term partner, a younger, more malleable version of herself already installed in a condo he'd bought downtown. Good. He finally turned his eyes, sweeping over her with disdain. She wore a simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to his tailored Zegna suit. She felt like a ghost in her own home. "The movers will be here tomorrow for my remaining effects. Your things? Well, you don't have much, do you? I'll have them put in storage. You have 30 days to collect them." Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her things were mostly books, research papers, and sentimental items from her family, things that held no monetary value to him. "Where am I supposed to go, Julian?" She asked the question, tasting like ash. The penthouse was in his name. The bank accounts had been systematically drained into trusts she couldn't access. Her lawyer, a timid man overwhelmed by Julian's legal Rottweilers, had managed to secure her a settlement that was, in Julian's world, pocket change. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe 2, if she was frugal. It was an insult disguised as a severance package. He smirked, a cruel twisting of the lips that never reached his televised eyes. "I don't know, Emma. That's your problem now, isn't it? You wanted to be independent. So be independent." He walked over to the island, picking up his pristine leather briefcase. He didn't even glance at her. He was already moving on. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She straightened her back, lifting her chin. "I will." Her defiance seemed to amuse him. He paused at the door, turning back for one final devastating volley. His face was a mask of mock pity. "You know, I almost feel sorry for you," he said, his voice dropping into the intimate conspiratorial tone he used on his podcasts. "You poured everything into me. You have no career, no connections of your own. You're, what, 36? Past your prime, darling. The world is a brutal place for women like you. He stepped closer, his expensive cologne suffocating her. He leaned in his voice a venomous whisper in her ear. Let me give you one last piece of free advice, my dear ex-wife. No one will ever want you. You're nothing without me. You carry the stench of failure. Men of quality, men of substance, they want a winner. They don't want someone's discarded leftovers. You will die alone. He pulled back, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He had delivered his curse. It was the final brick in the wall he had built around her heart. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous empty space. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She just stood there, his words slithering into the cracks of her broken confidence. No one will ever want you. You will die alone. She finally let out a ragged sob, collapsing against the cold marble. The city lights outside blurred into a cruel, glittering mockery. Julian was right. She had given him her youth, her intellect, her loyalty. And in return, he had taken her name, her home, her future, and left her with nothing but a curse ringing in her ears. In that moment, sitting alone in the ruins of her life, she believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of beige. Beige boxes, beige walls of a tiny third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, and a beige, flavorless existence. Emma had found the apartment in a daze. It was all she could afford. The grand views of Central Park were replaced by a view of a brick wall and a perpetually overflowing dumpster. The scent of fresh orchids Julian insisted on was replaced by the smell of damp old wood and her neighbor's cooking. She unpacked the few boxes Julian's men hadn't accidentally misplaced. Her books, her precious companions, filled makeshift shelves. Her research notes on the artist Artemisia Gentileschi, a female painter who had triumphed over immense personal violation and patriarchal oppression, felt like a cruel joke. Emma had once dreamed of writing the definitive book on her. Now she could barely summon the energy to read the titles. Julian's curse echoed in the cramped space. No one will ever want you. It became the soundtrack to her lonely nights. She'd scroll through social media, a masochistic ritual. Julian was thriving. He was photographed with A-list actors giving talks at prestigious conferences, and his new girlfriend, a model named Crystal, was splashed across his Instagram, always laughing, always perfect. He had already rewritten their history, painting himself as the patient husband who had finally freed himself from a negative and uninspiring partner. His followers lapped it up, flooding his comments with praise for his strength and authenticity. Emma's only lifeline was Chloe Davies. Chloe, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal art gallery owner, had been her friend since college. She'd never liked Julian, calling him a self-help vampire who drains the life out of everyone and sells it back to them in a paperback. Chloe showed up one Friday evening, armed with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a container of pad thai. She took one look at the apartment, and Emma's gaunt face and her expression hardened. "Okay, that's it," Chloe declared, setting the food on a wobbly IKEA table. "The moping is officially over. Operation Phoenix begins now." Emma gave a weak smile. "I don't feel much like a mythical bird, Chloe. More like a pigeon with a broken wing." "Nonsense," Chloe said, pouring a generous glass of Sancerre. "You are Emma Vance. You can spot a forged Botticelli from 20 paces, and you can recite Vasari's Lives of the Artists backwards. That sociopath didn't give you your brain. He just tried to convince you not to use it. We just need to remind you who you are." Chloe talked for hours, her voice filling the quiet apartment with life. She spoke of new artists, of gallery openings, of the vibrant world that Emma had been cut off from. Slowly, tentatively, Emma found herself correcting a point Chloe made about the use of lapis lazuli in the Scrovegni chapel, the old fire of her intellect flickering faintly. "See, she's still in there," Chloe said, pointing at her with a shrimp-laden fork. "Now for the main event." She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. The calligraphy was elegant. "What's this?" Emma asked. "This," Chloe said with a flourish, "is your re-entry into the world. It's the St. Jude's Foundation Annual Benefit Gala, the biggest art world event of the fall. They're auctioning off a recently discovered Degas sketch. Everyone who is anyone will be there." Emma recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. "Chloe, no, I can't. What would I wear? Who would I talk to? Julian will be there. He's a patron." "First," Chloe said, ticking the points off on her fingers, "I have a friend at Marchesa who owes me a colossal favor. You will be dressed in a gown that will make angels weep. Second, you will talk to me. And third, screw Julian. Seeing you there looking magnificent and not giving a damn about him will be like a stake through his narcissistic heart. It's the perfect revenge." "I don't want revenge, Chloe. I just want to be invisible." "Too bad," Chloe countered. "Invisibility is cancelled. You've spent a decade in the shadows. It's time to stand in the light. Not for him, not for anyone else. For you. Remember the woman who wanted to write the Gentileschi book? The one who was passionate and brilliant? She wouldn't hide from a bully in a bespoke suit. She'd face him." Emma looked at the invitation. The St. Jude's Foundation. The very name felt like a sign. She thought of Julian's parting words, the poison of his curse. "You will die alone." Maybe he was right. Or maybe, just maybe, Chloe was. Maybe the only way to break a curse was to defy it. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it reached the bottom of her lungs in months. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. "Okay, I'll go." Chloe's smile was triumphant. "That's my girl. Now let's finish this wine. We have a phoenix to raise from the ashes." The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and even more glittering people. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, scented with expensive perfume and ambition. Emma felt a wave of vertigo. For years, she had navigated these events at Julian's side, a silent accessory. Tonight, she was on her own, and it was terrifying. Chloe, true to her word, had worked magic. The Marchesa gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that shimmered with every movement. It was elegant, understated, and fit her as if it were spun just for her. Her hair was swept up in a loose, romantic chignon, and for the first time in a long time, the woman staring back at her from the reflection in a champagne flute looked not like a victim, but like herself. "Stop hiding behind the ficus," Chloe hissed, pulling her gently by the arm. "You look like a goddess. Own it." They circulated Chloe, greeting people with air kisses and sharp witticisms. Emma managed a few polite smiles, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She kept scanning the crowd for Julian, a primal sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The auction began. The auctioneer, a man with a plummy British accent and a theatrical flair, charmed the room into parting with extraordinary sums of money for art vacations and experiences. Emma found herself genuinely captivated by the art, her professional eye assessing the works, her mind momentarily distracted from her anxiety. The main event was the Degas sketch, a delicate, intimate drawing of a ballerina tying her shoe. Bidding was fierce, paddles shooting up across the room. Emma watched mesmerized when she saw him. Julian. He was sitting at a prominent front table, his arm possessively around Crystal's chair, his paddle held high. He wanted the Degas. Of course he did. It was a trophy. Emma felt a chill and turned away, needing to escape. "I need some air," she murmured to Chloe, slipping away from their table towards a set of French doors that led to a small, secluded terrace. The cool night air was a balm. The terrace was blessedly empty, overlooking a quiet courtyard garden. She leaned against the balustrade, closing her eyes, trying to will away the image of Julian's smug face. This was a mistake. She wasn't ready. "It's a beautiful piece, isn't it, the Degas?" The voice was deep, calm, and startlingly close. Emma's eyes snapped open. A man was standing a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows, looking not at her, but out at the garden. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it with a kind of casual indifference, as if it were a second skin. "Yes," Emma found herself saying, her voice a little breathless. His use of line, "It's so economical, but it captures the entire weight and strain of the moment. It's not just a pretty picture." The man turned his head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile in the dim light. Strong jaw, thoughtful eyes, an air of quiet intensity that was the polar opposite of Julian's performative charisma. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. "Most people just see the ballerina," he said, his gaze now on her. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a stormy sea. "You see the work." A blush rose on her cheeks. It was the first time in years anyone had seen her, and not the woman standing next to Julian Thorne. I studied art history. It was my field." Was he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice? Is she corrected herself, a spark of her old self igniting? "It is my field." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Good." An awkward, yet not uncomfortable silence fell between them. From inside, they could hear the auctioneer's voice rising to a crescendo. "Sold to Mr. Julian Thorne." Emma flinched, the sound of his name a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold returning. The stranger's perceptive eyes missed nothing. "You know him," he stated. It wasn't a question. She gave a wry, bitter laugh. "He's my ex-husband. The divorce was finalized yesterday." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She instantly regretted it. Why was she dumping her baggage on this handsome stranger? But he didn't recoil or offer empty platitudes. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded like he actually meant for the turmoil, not for the divorce itself. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. "It's fine. I should go back inside." "Wait," he said, taking a step closer. The space between them seemed to crackle with an unexpected energy. "My name is Alistair." He extended his hand. She placed hers in it. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle. A jolt, like a static shock, shot up her arm. "Emma," she replied. "Emma," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma, who sees the work." He held her hand for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. As she turned to walk back inside, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter, he spoke again, his voice soft. "For what it's worth, he didn't deserve that sketch. He only sees the ballerina." Emma walked back into the ballroom, her mind reeling. She didn't see the rest of the auction. She didn't even notice when Chloe returned to the table. She was consumed by the brief, intense connection with the man on the terrace. Alistair. As the gala wound down, Chloe helped her navigate the exit. They were waiting for their car when a flurry of activity erupted near the main entrance. A swarm of paparazzi, who had been waiting for a politician to leave, suddenly turned their lenses towards the doors. Alistair emerged. And suddenly, Emma understood. The flashes were blinding. Shouts of his name echoed in the night. Alistair Sterling. The Alistair Sterling. The reclusive tech billionaire. The prodigy who had made his fortune in sustainable energy and now ran the Sterling Foundation, one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his presence here was a major event. He seemed unfazed by the chaos, his expression impassive as his security team tried to clear a path. His gaze swept the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met Emma's. There was a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the smile she'd seen on the terrace. Chloe was gaping. "Oh my God, you were talking to Alistair Sterling, the great white whale of the Forbes list." Before Emma could answer, the crowd surged. A clumsy photographer stumbled backward, bumping into Emma and sending her off balance. She gasped, expecting to fall, but a strong hand shot out and caught her arm, steadying her. Another hand instinctively found hers, lacing their fingers together in a firm, protective grip. It was Alistair. He had broken from his security cordon and was suddenly right there, his body shielding hers from the jostling crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned, meant only for her. She could only nod, speechless. The world seemed to slow down. The roar of the paparazzi, the shouting, it all faded into a dull hum. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him next to her. It lasted only for a few seconds. His security team quickly enveloped them, guiding them towards a waiting black sedan, a car far more imposing than the Uber they had called. He opened the back door, still holding her hand, and looked at her. "Let me give you a ride," he said. It wasn't a request. Dumbly, she nodded again and slid into the plush leather interior. Chloe scrambled in after her, wide-eyed. Alistair followed, and the door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights behind. Emma looked down. Her hand was still linked with his. Across the street, hidden in the shadows, a freelance paparazzo, who had missed the main scrum, lowered his camera. He hadn't gotten a clear shot of Sterling's face, but he'd gotten something else, something intimate and intriguing. A close-up of their hands perfectly intertwined, a story in a single frame. He smiled. This was better than a politician. This was gold. Emma woke up to the sound of a hurricane. Not a literal one, but the digital tempest of her phone vibrating violently on her bedside table. It buzzed and chirped with a relentless, frantic energy she'd never experienced before. Groggily, she reached for it, her mind still fuzzy from the surreal events of the previous night. Alistair's driver had dropped her and Chloe off, a polite and formal goodbye hanging in the air. The feeling of his hand in hers lingered like a phantom limb. She squinted at the screen. 347 new text messages, 98 missed calls, a torrent of notifications from Instagram, Twitter, and news apps she didn't even remember installing. Her blood ran cold. This was the kind of attention Julian received, not her. Her thumb trembled as she swiped to open a text from Chloe. It was a string of incoherent capital letters and a link. "Chloe, Emma. Oh my God, holy Sikh, look at this now." With a deep sense of foreboding, she clicked the link. It took her to the homepage of TMZ. And there it was. the lead story, the photograph. It was an artful shot, tightly framed and undeniable. Two hands. Her hand, recognizable by the delicate silver ring her grandmother had left her, was entwined with a man's larger, stronger hand. The cuff of a tuxedo and a sliver of an impossibly expensive-looking watch were visible. The headline screamed, "Mystery Woman, Reclusive Billionaire, Alistair Sterling, in Shockingly Public Romance." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She scrambled to open other news sites. Page 6. The Daily Mail, Vanity Fair. It was everywhere. The same photo. The same breathless speculation. Who is Alistair Sterling's secret girlfriend? The handhold seen round the world. Sources say the woman is a stunning brunette who spent the evening at the St. Jude's Gala with the tech mogul. She was the mystery woman, the stunning brunette. It felt like she was reading about a character in a novel, not herself. Then her stomach dropped as she saw the comments section. The digital mob was already at work. Sleuths were trying to identify her. And then someone did. A gossip columnist with a long memory posted a picture of her from 3 years ago standing behind Julian at a book launch. The narrative shifted with whiplash speed. Update: Sterling's mystery woman, identified as Emma Vance, ex-wife of self-help guru Julian Thorne. And that's when the second storm hit. Julian's storm. He hadn't waited. He hadn't stayed silent. He had gone on the offensive with brutal surgical precision. He posted a statement on his Instagram, a platform with 20 million followers. It was a masterclass in manipulation, cloaked in his signature brand of faux vulnerability. The post was a picture of him looking pensively out a window, a cup of tea in his hands. The caption began, "Friends, many of you have been asking me about the recent news. It is with a heavy heart that I must address this. As you know, I have recently gone through a painful and private separation. I have tried to handle this with dignity and grace, wishing only the best for Emma. To see these photos today is deeply concerning." Emma felt sick. Concerned, I have always been a supporter of Emma, even as we grew apart. But I fear she is in a vulnerable place right now. To see her latch onto a man of such immense wealth and power so quickly, literally the day after our divorce was finalized, is alarming. I pray that she is not being taken advantage of, and that this is not a cry for help or a desperate attempt to fill a void. I am worried for her well-being. I will be making no further comment on this matter, as I wish to focus on healing. Please send her your positive energy. It was diabolical. In one fell swoop, he had painted her as a mentally unstable, desperate gold digger. He was the concerned, sensitive ex-husband. She was the pathetic, grasping woman. He had co-opted the language of therapy and wellness, a language she had helped him perfect, and turned it into a weapon against her. The comments were a tidal wave of vitriol aimed squarely at her. Wow, she didn't waste any time, did she? Gold digger alert. Poor Julian. He's so classy. She's clearly a mess. I knew there was a reason he left her. She sounds like a parasite. Hope Alistair Sterling sees her for what she is. She's just using him for his money. The curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. He was making it come true, not by magic, but by the brute force of public opinion. He was branding her, defining her for the entire world, before she could even speak a word in her own defense. Her tiny apartment felt like it was closing in on her. The brick wall outside was a prison. She curled into a ball on her bed, the phone lying face down on the floor, still buzzing, still spewing poison. The shame was suffocating. He had won. He had utterly, completely destroyed her. She had defied his curse for one night, and in return, he had unleashed hell. The tears she had held back for so long finally came not as a gentle rain, but as a racking, hopeless storm. The knocking was soft at first, then more insistent. Emma ignored it, pulling a pillow over her head to block out the world. It was probably a reporter or a process server with a cease and desist letter from Julian's lawyers for besmirching his good name. Emma, it's Chloe. Open this door right now, or I'm calling the fire department and telling them I smell gas and a crazy woman with a vintage toaster. Reluctantly, Emma dragged herself to the door and unbolted it. Chloe swept in her face a mixture of fury and concern. She was holding a large bag from a fancy bakery and the morning papers, which she promptly threw in the trash. "Don't read that garbage," she ordered. "I've already seen it. That man is not a human being. He's a sentient, weaponized press release." Chloe took in Emma's tear-streaked face and crumpled form, and her expression softened. "Oh, honey." She enveloped Emma in a hug. "Don't you let him do this to you. Don't you let him win. He already has Chloe," Emma croaked. "Look at what they're saying. The whole world thinks I'm some desperate, grasping social climber. He knew exactly what he was doing." "Of course he did." Chloe said, her voice steely. "This is his playbook. Control the narrative, isolate the target, publicly humiliate. He did it to that journalist who wrote a critical profile of him 2 years ago. Remember? He's a predator." Just then, Emma's intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Emma stared at it in terror. "Don't answer it," she whispered. "It could be the pizza I ordered for moral support," Chloe said, trying to lighten the mood. She pressed the button. "Who is it?" A calm, male voice, devoid of static, came through the speaker. "It's Alistair Sterling." "For Emma Vance." Emma and Chloe froze, staring at each other in disbelief. "Alistair Sterling. Here, at her third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn." "Let him in," Chloe hissed, suddenly galvanized. "For God's sake, Emma, buzz him in." In a daze, Emma pressed the button. A few moments later, there was a quiet knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find him standing there. He was dressed not in a tuxedo, but in dark jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket. He looked younger, less intimidating, but the same quiet intensity radiated from him. He was holding a small, unassuming cardboard box. "Miss Vance." "Emma," he said, his grey eyes searching her face. He saw the tear tracks, the fear. His expression wasn't one of pity, but of a kind of grim understanding. "I know this is an intrusion. May I come in?" She could only nod, stepping aside. He walked into her tiny living room, his presence making the space feel both smaller and safer at the same time. He glanced around at the bookshelves, his eyes lingering on the titles. "I came to apologize," he said, turning back to her. "My presence last night and my carelessness brought this circus upon you. I am truly sorry for that." "It's not your fault," Emma said, finding her voice. "It's his. It's my world that has invaded yours," Alistair countered. "And I have some experience with this, which is why I'm here." He placed the box he was carrying on her coffee table. "This is for you." She opened it cautiously. Inside was a sleek silver device. "It's a secure, encrypted satellite phone," he explained. "Untraceable, unhackable. My personal number is the only one programmed into it. Your current phone is a liability. The press can track it. It can be hacked. This is safe." Emma stared at him, bewildered by the practicality and foresight of the gesture. I also saw his statement. Alistair continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. It was a cowardly and calculated attack. He is attempting to define you before you have a chance to define yourself. I will not allow that to happen. Chloe, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway like it was a tennis match, finally spoke up. Damn right. But how do we fight back? He has 20 million followers who think he's the second coming. Alistair met Chloe's gaze, giving her a nod of respect. You don't fight him on his battlefield. You don't sling mud. You render his attacks irrelevant by telling the truth, but on your own terms. He looked back at Emma, his focus entirely on her. He's accused you of being a gold digger. So we show them you have no interest in my money. He's painted you as unstable. So we show them your strength and intelligence. A spark of anger, hot and clean, finally burned through Emma's despair. He built his entire empire on my work. The words hung in the air. Alistair's expression sharpened. What do you mean, his book? Emma said, the story pouring out of her now. The Architect of You. It was supposed to be my book. My dissertation was on the philosophical concept of the self in Renaissance art, how artists and thinkers of the time constructed their public and private personas. It was about authenticity, legacy, building a life of substance. I had a manuscript, years of research. Julian, he took it. He read it, simplified it, stripped out all the academic nuance, and repackaged it with pop psychology buzzwords. He stole my soul and sold it as a self-help guide. Chloe looked horrified. Emma, you never told me it was that direct. I was ashamed, Emma admitted. And he convinced me that no one would ever believe me, that it was our project. Alistair was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. He looked from the pain in Emma's face to the bookshelves crammed with her life's passion. Do you have proof? He asked quietly. Drafts, notes, emails. Emma's heart leaped. Yes, they're in storage, old laptops, boxes of notes. I have everything. Alistair's expression was now one of cold, clear purpose. He was no longer just a handsome stranger or a reclusive billionaire. He was an ally, a powerful one. Then, we have a new plan, he said. We are no longer on the defensive. He wrote that he's concerned about you. Let's give him something to be genuinely concerned about. He looked directly at Emma, and for the first time, she saw not just kindness, but a deep, formidable strength that he was offering to share. He tried to take your voice, Emma. I think it's time the world finally heard it. The next week was a whirlwind of covert operations and quiet strategy orchestrated from Alistair Sterling's minimalist Soho office, a place that felt more like a modern art gallery than a corporate headquarters. There were no reporters outside, no paparazzi. Alistair's world was protected by a level of security and discretion that was an art form in itself. His team, a small group of fiercely loyal and terrifyingly competent individuals, retrieved Emma's boxes from storage. They worked with a forensic IT specialist who recovered every draft, every time-stamped note, every email exchange from her old hard drives. They laid it all out on a large conference table, a mountain of evidence that traced the intellectual genesis of the Architect of You directly and unequivocally to Emma. There were her early manuscripts full of complex academic arguments next to Julian's later dumbed-down versions with his handwritten notes in the margins changing her phrasing into marketable sound bites. It was a clear and damning paper trail of intellectual theft. Seeing it all laid out, Emma felt a profound sense of validation, followed by a surge of cold fury. He didn't just steal my words, she said to Alistair, her voice shaking with emotion. He stole my entire thesis on life. And then he used it to lecture the world and me about authenticity. Alistair stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Over the past few days, their alliance had deepened into something more. They'd spent hours talking not just about Julian, but about everything. She learned about his own past with the media, a vicious, untrue story about his family that had made him retreat from public life years ago. He learned about her passion for Artemisia Gentileschi, and he listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she never had with Julian. A quiet, powerful intimacy was growing between them, forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. "He won't get away with it," Alistair said, his voice low and resolute. "Now, we need to choose our moment." The moment presented itself a few days later. An invitation arrived for Julian to be the keynote speaker at the Global Integrity Summit, a Davos-like conference for tech leaders and media personalities. His topic, dripping with irony, was truth and transparency in the digital age. "It's perfect," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. "It's his home turf. He'll feel untouchable. The hubris will be off the charts. He'll have the whole event locked down," Emma countered, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "I can't just walk in and accuse him." "You won't have to," Alistair said. He tapped a few commands into his tablet. A picture of a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut appeared on the screen. "This is Sarah Jenkins. She's moderating his keynote. She's one of the toughest investigative journalists in the business. She owes my foundation a favor for funding her documentary on dark money in politics. More importantly, she hates frauds." The plan was audacious. Sarah Jenkins, armed with a dossier of Emma's evidence, would conduct the Q&A after Julian's speech. She wouldn't ambush him with accusations. She would do it with his own words and with Emma's. The day of the summit, Emma felt sick with nerves. She wasn't at the conference hall. She was with Alistair and Chloe in a secure viewing suite nearby, watching the live feed on a massive screen. She had done her part. She had written a formal, eloquent statement and had given Sarah Jenkins her blessing to use her research, her words, her story. The broadcast began. There was Julian on a massive stage, bathed in a reverent blue light. He was at the peak of his powers, delivering a smooth, charismatic speech about the importance of living an authentic life. He even had the gall to reference his divorce. Recently, he said, his voice thick with false emotion, "I had to make a difficult choice to align my private life with my public values of honesty and growth. It was painful, but living your truth is never easy." Emma felt Alistair's hand find hers under the table. She gripped it tightly. Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. He sat down beaming as Sarah Jenkins took the seat opposite him. She started with a few softball questions, lulling him into a state of comfortable arrogance. Then she shifted. "Julian, your book, The Architect of You, is built on a very powerful central metaphor of constructing a life. It's incredibly detailed. I was curious about your research process." Julian preened. "It was years of work, deep personal intellectual exploration. It really came from my soul." "Interesting," Sarah said, looking down at her notes. "Because I have here some academic papers from 2012, written by a then Emma Vance, that explore the exact same theme, the construction of persona in the Renaissance. The language is remarkably similar. For instance, you write, 'To be authentic is to be the sole architect of your own reality.' A fascinating turn of phrase. Almost identical to Ms. Vance's 2011 dissertation proposal, which states, 'The Renaissance ideal was to be the sole architect of one's public reality. A flicker of panic in Julian's eyes. The audience murmured. Sarah pressed on her voice like ice. In Chapter 3, you discuss the facade of legacy, Ms. Vance's research uses the exact same term, the facade of legacy, in relation to the Medici family. On page 184, you use an anecdote about Michelangelo. That anecdote is lifted almost verbatim from an email Ms. Vance sent you in 2013, which we have a copy of. Shall I go on the color drained from Julian's face? He was sputtering, trying to interrupt. This is an ambush. My work with my ex-wife was a collaboration. She was my partner. Was she a collaborator when you registered the copyright solely in your name? Sarah countered, her voice sharp. Was she a collaborator when you pocketed the entirety of the 8-figure advance? We spoke to your publisher. Her name is not mentioned on any contract. In fact, we have a statement from Ms. Vance herself. And then on the giant screen behind the stage, a picture of Emma appeared. Not a paparazzi shot, but a professional, dignified headshot they had taken days before. Beside it, her statement began to scroll. I am not a victim or a gold digger, the statement read. I am a scholar. The core concepts, the research, and the intellectual framework of the architect of you were my work. I am proud of that work, and I will not allow it to be used to promote a false narrative of authenticity, nor to be used as a weapon to publicly shame me. The truth, as Mr. Thorne is so fond of saying, has a way of coming out. The room was in stunned silence. Julian Thorne, the great guru of truth, was staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, live in front of his most important peers. He was being exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief. The cameras zoomed in on his face, no longer smug, but pale and sweating. The architect had been unmasked, revealing nothing but a hollow frame behind the beautiful facade. The reckoning had arrived. The silence in the conference hall was a living entity. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. On the massive screen, Julian Thorne's face, once a carefully curated mask of enlightened confidence, was now a canvas of pure, unfiltered horror. The camera operator, sensing a historic moment, held the close-up, refusing to cut away. The world watched as the architect of you was publicly deconstructed beam by rotten beam. He didn't just look guilty, he looked erased. In the quiet viewing suite, the only sound was the sharp intake of Chloe's breath. Emma sat perfectly still, her hand held firmly in Alistair's. She wasn't watching Julian's face. She was watching the words on the screen. Her words, her truth, finally illuminated for all to see. It wasn't a feeling of triumph that washed over her, but one of profound, solemn relief, like a patient taking their first breath after a long and suffocating fever. The noise in her head, the constant echo of Julian's gaslighting, and her own self-doubt had finally ceased. Alistair squeezed her hand gently. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice low. Quiet, she whispered, a small, wondering smile touching her lips. "The storm. I think it's finally over." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound respect. "No," he said, his grey eyes soft but resolute. "The storm is just beginning for him. For you, this is the dawn." The fallout was a digital tsunami. Before Julian could even be escorted off the stage by stunned event staff, the clip was being sliced, diced, and shared across every platform. Thorne fraud. The Great Pretender and his stand with Emma Vance exploded globally. The initial trickle of outrage became a flood. Celebrities who had once touted his book as their Bible posted hurried statements of condemnation. Brands that had sponsored his podcast issued press releases severing all ties. His publisher, facing a public relations nightmare, released a statement within 3 hours. In light of new information regarding the authorship of The Architect of You, we are immediately suspending all promotion and distribution of the title and will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Mr. Thorne. It was corporate speak for a public execution. Crystal, his model girlfriend, quietly deleted every photo of him from her Instagram feed. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. The machine that had protected and promoted him turned on him with merciless efficiency. The final humiliating image came a week later, a grainy paparazzi photo of Julian unshaven and haggard in a wrinkled tracksuit, frantically putting trash bins out in front of his empty penthouse. The man who had preached about designing one's life looked like he had lost the blueprint to his own. Emma, however, refused to get drawn into the spectacle of his demise. While the world feasted on the schadenfreude she and Alistair were building, her new legal team, a phalanx of New York's sharpest minds funded by Alistair, moved with swift precision. The settlement meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a dictation of terms. Emma sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, as her lawyers laid out the undeniable evidence of intellectual property theft and demanded reparations, not alimony, but a figure representing her share of the book's profits and damages for copyright infringement. Julian's legal team, knowing they were beaten, folded without a fight. With the first transfer of funds, she didn't buy a new apartment or a new wardrobe. Her first act was to sign the charter for the Vance Institute for Historical Studies. Its mission was clear: to fund and promote the work of scholars, particularly women, in fields historically dominated by men. Its first grant was awarded to a young art historian who had discovered compelling evidence that a famous sculpture attributed to a 17th-century master was in fact the work of his uncredited and forgotten sister. Her next meeting was with the acquisitions editor of a prestigious university press. The editor, a woman with kind eyes and a deep respect for academia, didn't just want to publish her original manuscript on Gentileschi. She wanted to publish a new expanded edition. "We also want you to write a new introduction," the editor said, "about your journey, about what it means to reclaim a narrative, your story. It's as important as the history you write about." For the first time, Emma cried. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but of overwhelming gratitude. Throughout it all, Alistair was her silent, steadfast partner. He never overshadowed her, never spoke for her. He simply created a space where she could be heard. Their relationship, born in the glare of a media firestorm, settled into a rhythm that was quiet, private, and deeply authentic. One evening, he came to her small Brooklyn apartment, the apartment she had decided to keep a reminder of, where she had started her new life. He found her covered in flour, attempting to bake bread, her tiny kitchen a chaotic mess. He didn't laugh at the mess. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, washed his hands, and started helping her knead the dough. "You know," he said, his hands working alongside hers, "my life was very orderly before I met you. Every minute scheduled, every interaction vetted. I'm sorry for disrupting it," she said with a small smile. "Don't be," he replied, stopping to look at her, his eyes serious. "It was orderly, but it was grey. You brought the color back, Emma. You make the noise of the world bearable." A few months later, they stood on the terrace of his penthouse. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The space, unlike Julian's cold, minimalist trophy home, was warm and lived in, filled with books stacked on every surface and art that was challenging and personal. He handed her an advance copy of her book, The Power of Persona Artemisia Gentileschi and the Forging of a Legacy, by Dr. Emma Vance. Her name, her title, her work. She ran her fingers over the embossed letters. I used to stand in a place just like this and feel like the smallest person in the world, she confessed, her voice soft. He told me that I was nothing without him, that I would die alone. Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. He was a fool, he murmured into her hair. A man that insecure could never understand a woman like you. He didn't understand the irony of his own curse. Emma leaned back against his chest, finally understanding. He thought it was an ending, she said, a sense of wonder in her voice. But it was a catalyst. If he hadn't said those things, if he hadn't pushed me out so cruelly, I would never have gone to that gala. I would never have met you. I would never have found the courage to fight for my work. Julian's curse wasn't a prophecy. It was an accidental gift. His attempt to consign her to oblivion was the very thing that had forced her into the light. He had meant to be the architect of her destruction, but instead, he had merely laid the foundation for her magnificent reconstruction. She turned in Alistair's arms, looking up at him. The love she saw in his eyes was not the possessive, conditional affection she had once known, but a deep, quiet partnership built on mutual respect and a shared truth. The city lights below no longer seemed to mock her, but to celebrate with her. It was a new dawn, bright and clear, and infinite with promise. And it was all hers. Emma Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, especially the opinion of those who try to diminish us. It's a testament to the fact that the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is often the necessary prelude to a far better one. Her journey from a cursed ex-wife to a celebrated scholar, hand in hand, with a man who saw her for who she truly was, shows us that the most profound comebacks are rooted in reclaiming our own truth and our own voice. Julian's curse was meant to be her prison, but it became the key that unlocked her true potential.